Welcome to episode 12 of the Mother Gaia Birthy Pod. Today I'm thrilled to welcome Nicole Hamic, a talented doula and birth photographer from Utah. In this episode we explore the vital role of birth workers, unpack what a doula truly does, and dive into Nicole's inspiring journey into the world of birth work and photography. Nicole also shares her unique approach to capturing the raw beauty and emotion of birth, while preserving the sacred, undisturbed atmosphere of the birth space. Whether you're a parent, a birth worker, or just curious about the magic of birth, this conversation is full of insights and inspiration. So let's dive in.
So I'm Nicole Hamic, and I am a doula and birth photographer and videographer based out of Salt Lake City, Utah in the USA. I also do other photography, kind of what I call birth adjacent. So I do maternities, I do families, and I do lifestyle newborns. I'm also currently kind of branching out into doing some couples work as well, because it kind of feeds my creative soul in a different way. So yeah, and I am definitely both like a very creative human, but then I also obviously work as a doula and have for over 9 years, kind of in that sphere as well. So it's kind of an interesting mix of what I do. I have two smallish children. I guess they're not really small children anymore. They're 7 and 9. I've been married for almost 2 decades. We have our 20th wedding anniversary coming up next year. And
Yay!
yeah. And I have a dog, a very fluffy dog named Milo. So
Oh, I know so many dogs called Milo.
it's a very popular dog name.
Yeah. Cool. So I think the first thing I want to ask you is what came first, your doulaing or your photography?
So I actually was a doula first.
Yeah.
I'd spent most of my life, most of my formative life, I guess, or post-formative life. I don't know, actually. I got really involved in women's health and women's reproductive rights starting in my teen years. And that very much carried through into my college experience, my early adult life. I worked as a yoga teacher for about 18 years, focusing very much on like women's health and mental health and that sort of thing as well. And then I was also a massage therapist for almost a decade, again with a very heavy like women's health focus. And through those two avenues, I started being asked to attend births because there were women that I'd been working with who trusted me, who felt I could help guide them with their breath. And I feel like so much of what I've always done, like both as a yoga teacher and a massage therapist, was helping people guide the experience of their body, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing more deeply, rooted into the experience of your body than giving birth, right? And so I kind of looked at getting into birth off and on for quite a few years before I finally became an official doula, if you will. I looked at actually getting my certified nursing degree, although at the time it just was not the right thing. And I'm actually really glad I went with the doula track. It's been a really good fit for me as a person. And yeah, so I was a doula first.
Yeah.
I picked up a camera for the first time about a year after I had become a doula.
Oh, so it wasn't like a long time after then. It was fairly...
It wasn't. No, it was rather early on in the process. I was actually backing up a colleague, and she had called me pretty urgently and was like, "Hey, I have this client in labor. I can't get to her birth. Can you go for me?" She's like, "She's already at the hospital. She's rocking and rolling. I need somebody to go." And I was like, "Sure, I can go." And she said to me, "Nicole, I always take pictures for my clients during their labor. It's like included in what I do. Can you do that?" And I was like, okay. I mean, okay. I was like, I don't do that, like, I don't even know what I'm doing.
I'm all right at a selfie, maybe, but
yeah, exactly. Like, I don't like with my really, but this is a decade ago, like my bad cell
yeah.
phone. I don't know. And my dad had actually recently sent me a little Nikon point and shoot that I
Okay.
had like barely knew how to use. He had sent it for Christmas and was like, "Here, please take more pictures of your children."
Yeah.
And basically, so I took that to that birth and I took pictures and I came home and I like had to call up a friend and be like, what do I do with them now? Um, but it was such a light bulb moment for me, like true, like out of the cartoons, like bing, like above my head.
Yeah.
This is the missing part of what you have been doing, right? And so it was a really wild ride because I immediately like called up a couple of people that I knew did professional birth photography, and I got a mentor. And I bought my first DSLR and I bought lenses and I signed up for a course. And I was just like all in head first from that moment on. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. So, I mean, obviously, like doula work over there it's slightly different to over here. I think it's a lot more people obviously know about it and a lot more people use it. So obviously the birth photography side of it, again, is more well known. I've had a few
Mm-hmm.
people when I've said about, oh, would you like photos taken and this, that, and the other, they look at me as if I've grown an extra head. Like, why would you take a photo of that? So like, how have
Uh-huh.
you found it as people jumped at the chance to have a birth photographer there, or do you come up against a few people
You
going,
know,
why?
I definitely do. I mean, still, undoubtedly, I think that, if you just go to my website, the first thing you're going to see is beautiful birth imagery that I've created over the years, right? And so I think it starts to, even before we've even had a conversation, plant the seed that that's what I do, right? And I think it is becoming more common in that, like, you know, every year various birth photography competitions get printed in uh various worldwide publications. Like, I've been published in the HuffPost multiple years, and we've had birth photographers with their work in Vogue. We've had so I think more and more people are becoming slightly more attuned to it. And when I talk about birth photography, I'm like, this is not just like raw images of like human exiting another human's body. Like, and I think that that's what people, they just imagine all like
Yeah.
crowning shot and like straight up the birth canal kind of imagery. And you're like, no, 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 like that's not what this is
Yeah.
about. This is about your
Yeah.
story, right? This is the story of your child coming into the world. And it's a really powerful story. And and those first couple of hours of you meeting this person and who they really are for the first time. When our babies are in the womb, there's infinite possibility, right? It's very much
Yeah.
a Schrodinger's cat situation, right? Like, who is this person, right, that is living inside of me? And you start to kind of get a sense for their personality, even when they're inside. But then on the outside, you get to very much both learn the person that you created, and mourn the person that you didn't create, right? And
Yeah.
so there's so much magic in those moments, and that is what a birth photographer, I think a really skilled birth photographer, is going to bring to the table. There is, and I always tell people, I'm like, look, I am looking to create at least a handful of images throughout your birth that I call wall worthy. That they are something that are so beautiful, so precious, so well crafted that you want to print it and put it on your wall. And that people wouldn't even
Yeah.
immediately think, oh, that's birth imagery. but it's something beautiful
Yeah.
and powerful, right? And to me, that's what birth photography is. Sure, do we sometimes get really cool crowning shots? Yes. But to me, those are not always what's the most impactful. But let me tell you, a woman who has had a cesarean section and then hires a birth photographer and has a VBAC, let me tell you, that woman wants to see the pictures of that baby leaving her body and her getting her vaginal birth. Like, holy moly. Like,
Yeah.
that's so powerful and so deeply a part of that experience, right? And that's very much a part of like the consultation process. Do you want all the images? Do you not want crowning images? Do you want, like, how am I going to place myself as a photographer in the space that they're birthing in to get the kind of imagery that they want, that is like also like flattering and like good, because let me tell you, like,
Yeah.
if you shoot up this direction at any woman from the chin down, I'm sorry, we're all gonna have 55 chins, and it's not gonna be cute. And that's what, we always like laugh about when people are like, oh, my husband's gonna take some pictures. And I'm like, cool,
No.
cool. No, no, and you will hate all of them, but congratulations. You will throw them in the
Yeah.
bin. Like, no.
Yeah. I mean, I on the same context, I for my last birth, I'd said to my partner, if the only thing you do is take a few photos or a little video or something, so that I can witness it from a different angle that I'm
Yes.
not part of. And bless him, he
Yes.
got a 3-minute video of like
Mhm.
my third son's head literally coming out, but it was the most unflattering, unmagical. There's me there hoofing on gas and air, mooing like a cow with this baby's head coming out between my legs. I'm glad that I could see that, but absolutely under no circumstances is anyone else allowed to see that.
And that is just it, like I actually posted somebody sent me something on Instagram yesterday, and it was like, why you should hire the birth photographer, like send this to your husband, because yeah, it's an incredibly skilled thing to do. This is not just something where anybody with a camera can get birth images that are beautiful, that the birthing person afterwards can look back on their birth and be like, oh, this is gorgeous, this is beautiful, this is powerful, and I feel so strongly about it, I want to share it with other people too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because believe me, like I always tell people, my biggest regret from the birth of my first child is not having a birth photographer, because I think so many of us, and I've been doing this long enough, I feel like I can speak from also speaking to clients, is that
Yeah.
we don't remember we don't remember the majority of our births.
Yeah.
It's very amorphous in our minds. And I know, especially for women who are birthing people who have gone unmedicated, I think especially, we spend so much of that time with our eyes closed
Yes.
that I have no recollection of like who was holding my hand, who was brushing the hair back from my face, who was giving me water, what was going on around me. Like I just was in here like having to work
Yeah.
and breathe and
Yeah.
surrender, and that was all I could do. And so my first labor was 40 hours long. That was long.
Ooh, yeah. Wow.
Don't recommend. 1 out of 10 stars.
Yeah.
Um But like I have like 5 distinct memories from that experience. And most of them are for like the first 12 hours when I was like still mostly lucid.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and so like I have little like bits of memory.
Yeah.
And then my baby was out, which I also like just kind of don't remember very well.
Yeah.
And I would take my wedding photos. Like I said, I have been married nearly 20 years. I would take my wedding photos and put them in a bin and light them on fire if I could go back and have beautiful, powerful imagery of me doing the most incredible thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think a lot of people don't realize that you're not going to remember
Yeah.
everything, or where
Yeah.
people were, or what people were doing. And it's not the same as like you said, a wedding. You think about
Yeah.
how much planning someone puts into a wedding and how much
Yeah.
stuff that there is, and you go out and you spend forever with how are you going to get the dress, and what shoes you're going to wear, and who's going to be allowed to be there, and what food you're going to eat, and who's going to be the photographer, and this, that, and the other. And then particularly first time mums, if they've not had a lot of education, or they've not had other people giving birth around them, they just walk into it like, oh yeah, well, it's like it happens on the telly. You walk into a hospital and you walk back out again with a baby.
Yeah.
But it's such a monumental, transformative part of your life, and you come out and you go, well, what happened?
Yeah. What happened? And how did I get here? And like my baby 24 hours later looks wildly different than they did in those first couple hours after they were born. I mean, like they change so quickly,
Yeah.
right? And while I'm grateful for the horrible orange, grainy, bad angle pictures I have from my first birth that my dear friend took for me, um, and my children love their birth imagery. And I think that's another really, like, that's something I think a lot of people don't talk about. And I think probably because there's a lot of like body shame that I think is still wrapped up for a lot of women and birthing people in that experience, right? And but my children both know where to go and on the computer to pull up their birth pictures.
Yeah.
And they like looking through their moment of birth. They like their story, right? That's their story. And to see, to like, and now that they're older, like my children have sat down together at the dinner table, and like just together unprompted, I'm just in the kitchen doing my thing, and both my kids were sitting at the dinner table one day, and my son uses my old laptop that has both of their birth pictures on it, and he uses it for schoolwork. And um they were talking, and then they both just like pulled up their birth pictures and were like talking about their births with each other, and listening to them talk about and noticing the joy in the room and the
Yeah.
love that was clearly felt in that space when they were born, and the first time their daddy held them, and oh, that's Connie, that's Miss Connie, that's mommy's midwife, and oh, that was my first diaper, and oh, that was the first time I latched, and oh, that's mommy holding me, like those are
Yeah.
happy tears, she's like that sort of thing, like imprints, I think, on their souls.
Yeah.
And how powerful, how deeply meaningful for our children to be able to see the thought and care and love that they were brought into the world with,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So it's not even just like from the birthing person standpoint. I think birth imagery is wildly powerful, but it has generational benefit.
Yeah. Because it sets them up as well, because I think a lot of times as well, we don't talk to each other about birth for a start off, let alone our
Right.
own children. So
Yeah.
if you've got something like that you can show them that, like you said, it isn't just straight up the birth canal, and it's not
Yeah.
it's not a medical book either.
Right.
You are showing them their story, so that when they are older, it's not this mythical, magical, weird thing that happens behind closed doors in a hospital. They've got
Yes.
that tangible story, so that when
Yes.
they go in and they choose to have children, they already have that knowledge of, well, this is kind of what happens. These are the things that goes on. This is my birth story, so this is what I've got to go off, kind of thing. They're not kind
Yes.
of frightened off then themselves when they get to that point in their life.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think that um and that was a big part of why I got into birth photography, was realizing as a doula, I was a part of all of these very unique and different birth experiences, right? And I grew up in an age here in the US where we had a show on TLC network that was called A Baby Story.
Yeah.
And it was literally, I was addicted to it as like a middle schooler or high schooler. And it was just like, but it was all the same thing. A couple would go into the hospital and they'd be in labor, and then they'd lay in the bed and they'd be on their backs, and eventually somebody would catch a baby and hand them the baby, and it was a baby story. And it was all the exact same.
Yeah.
And every once in a while there would be something that was a little different, and I'd be like, "Ooh, that's different." Right? And so as a doula, I was getting to be a part of all these very beautiful, very different, very like emotional stories. And there was no way for me in my work, because I believe that doula work is activism work, right?
Yes. Yes.
And there was no way for me to really share that story, right? And share what made that birth like different and unique. And if people, if they don't, and visual is such a powerful way to show people what's possible.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't know that you can get an epidural and still be on your hands and knees because you've never seen it before, you can't convince both yourself, your partner, your nurse, your doctor that you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Very early on in my career, I had an image of a client of mine having a VBAC with an epidural on her hands and knees, with her midwife at the foot of the bed putting essential oils on her feet, go very viral. It's 8 years later, and I still every once in a while that picture like pops up. Somebody's resharing it, and it blew people's minds. But now it's much more common for women with epidurals to be allowed to get on their hands and knees to push their babies out. And that is also like, there's just so many layers to me of like why birth photography is important, right? Like I said, I could talk for hours about it. And that as an activist has been wildly important for me.
Yeah.
Because I can show people this is what's possible for you, right? Or these are your options, right? It's not just one size fits all. It's not just, oh, you do this thing and then you do that thing and then you do that thing. Sure, that's an option, but it's not the only way, right?
At this point in our conversation, Nicole and I touched on some important topics around activism, politics in birth world, and abortion rights. However, I've decided to save this part of our discussion for a special episode available exclusively in the Mother Gaia Birthy Pod Buy Me a Coffee members area. In that special episode, I recorded with her a few months later after the 2024 US elections. Nicole shares her thoughts and reflections on how the results may impact women's rights and birthing rights moving forward. It's an insightful and deeply personal discussion, and I can't wait to share it with our supporters. If you'd like to access this exclusive content and support the podcast, please head over to my Buy Me a Coffee page. In the meantime, let's get back to our original discussion. So I'm going to bring us back to more about sort of like the doula side and the photography side and things like that. One of the other questions that I kind of wrote down as we were talking earlier on, from my perspective of like being a doula, when I'm attending a birth and things like that, I've got a very hands-off, I sit in the corner, I'm there if they need me, I'm there for hand-holding or a few words of encouragement or whatever it is that they need in that time, but it's more about holding space. And I'll pick up some knitting or something. So I'm quietly in the background, just letting them get on with whatever they need to be getting on with. Obviously, you're a little bit more in the zone because you're taking photos. So kind of how do you work that? How do you position yourself? What do you do to be able to still hold that sacred space whilst doing that work?
That's a great question. And I will say that the majority of the time, I'm actually like a very different style of doula. And I think that I always tell people there's definitely space for all of us, right? And that there's like, I always tell people, like, I'm not the right doula for everybody, but there is a doula for everybody.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I tend to mostly attract people who want to go unmedicated, are probably birthing outside the hospital, or if they're inside the hospital system, they are using midwives. And I tend to be a much more hands-on sort of doula. I'm much more likely to tag team with their partner to do the hip squeezes and the counter pressure and to help them move and to make suggestions about positioning, and get their water and then get their snacks and do all the different things, you know. So I'm very rarely sitting during a birth. Very, very rarely. I will undoubtedly, if I do have a client who gets an epidural or whatever, I will absolutely sit on my tuchus and like have a quick nap. Or I bring my Kindle with me so that I'm just like unobtrusively reading in the corner, you know, in the dark or whatever, if they're having a sleep. While still also then like helping them change positions every 45 minutes and that sort of thing. But for me, I always describe the photography aspect of my doula work. It's like when you've been in birth for a long time, there's a rhythm to it, right? And we talk about contractions like waves, right? I think a lot of natural birthy people are like, oh, it's, you know, ride the wave and blah, blah, blah. But I think that term is wildly apropos because that is very much how I work with photography and doula work in birth. Because to me, like, I wear a crossbody strap. So when I'm hands-on or when I'm doing something, my camera is resting on my low back. You don't see it. It's not, you don't even notice it's there, right? And I'm doing my thing. And then my client has a contraction and I'm doing my thing. And then I'm going to step back as that starts to fade. And I'm going to take a picture, 1-2 quick snaps of like whatever little moment is happening, right? Maybe it's the look on her face as she relaxes, or maybe it's her partner like just brushing her hair away from her face, or sometimes it's just the look on the midwife's face while they're holding space for their client, or and then I'm going to get right back into the next wave, right? And so you get into this like rhythm of like support pictures, support, you know, and I'm not shooting all the time, you know. Sure, over a long birth, am I going to go home and upload and have 600 to 800 images to go through? Yes. Are they going to get that many images? Absolutely not, because half of them are probably going to be out of focus. I double shoot, so most things are going to be like duplicates. You know, they're going to end up with about 100 to 120 images of their birth at the end of the day.
The only other thing that comes up for me personally, because I'm quite sensitive to things that are happening around me, like most of the time, let alone when I've been pregnant and things. So your camera, does it make a noise? Does it have a flash? Have you disabled those things on it? How do you work around that when you're in the dark? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so the answer is no, I do not use silent shutter, because in dark, especially in the dark, it creates banding in your images. So you get garbage images. And then, but like I said, I try to not be very click happy, especially during like sensitive times in labor. Right. Again, I feel like once somebody hits transition and pushing, like a marching band could walk through the room and they would kind of just be like, whatever. Right. Right. And so again, like I try to be very intentional about when I'm taking pictures. And if I start to notice, oh, they're focusing on me, I'm just going to put it away. Right. Because I don't want to pull them out of, and I always tell my clients, I'm like, my first priority is your physiological birth. And if I feel like I'm disrupting that in some way, I'm going to stop taking pictures and I'm going to focus on getting you back into your zone, right?
Yeah.
And that being said, it rarely happens. And then the other thing I do is I use what's called bounced flash. So I actually have my little flash right here. So I use bounced flash, and this little thing sits in the shoe on the top of my camera. And then this is like it's a diffuser, and I bounce this up and behind me. And so the flash is not pointing at them or at their baby. Yeah. But what this allows me to do is create a 1/128th of a second long flash. It's super quick. That adds ambient light, allows my camera to capture crisp, clear images without having to change the ambient light in the room, which I find is way more disruptive of the physiological birth process than having a quick flash that's honestly going to happen so quickly, and it's so subtle that they don't even notice it's happening.
Thank you so much to Nicole for joining me and sharing her incredible insights into the world of birth work and photography. If you'd like to connect with Nicole or learn more about her services, all her information is linked in the show notes. Do please check that out. Next week, we're diving into a topic that doesn't get talked about nearly enough: how to divide the load of caring for a newborn and rediscovering ways to feel good about ourselves in the postpartum period. I'll be joined by sex coach Casey, who will share advice on how our partners can support us and help strengthen our relationships during this transformative time. You do not want to miss it. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week on the Mother Gaia Birthy Pod.